We now continue in our series in Isaiah, at which point I realized when I was given this passage that Isaiah has some really complicated stuff in it. And I think Aled and others have already explained to us that this is a book that has a lot of kind of poetic language in it, and therefore a lot of the things just on first reading don't make a huge amount of sense. And thank you guys for giving me this bit. So there we go. So here we go. We're going to look at Isaiah chapter 8 from verse 1 right through to verse 7 of chapter 9. And I thought, so I got your sympathy, we'd read through it first and then see what we make of it. So if you've got those notebooks, this is the ESV translation, which is also the one in the books where you can make notes. Then the Lord said to me, take a large tablet and write on it in common characters belonging to Maha Shalal Hashbaz, and I will get reliable witnesses. I've got to say that again in a minute. Uriah the priest and Zechariah the son of Jeberechiah to attest for me. And I went to the prophetess, and she conceived and bore a son. Then the Lord said to me, call his name Maha Shalal Hashbaz. For before the boy knows how to cry, my father or my mother, the wealth of Damascus and the spoil of Samaria will be carried away before the king of Assyria. The Lord spoke to me again, because this people has refused the waters of Shiloh that flow gently, and rejoice over Rezin and the son of Remaliah. Therefore, behold, the Lord is bringing up against them the waters of the river, mighty and many, the king of Assyria and all his glory. And it will rise over all its channels and go over all its banks. And it will sweep on into Judah. It will overflow and pass on, reaching even to the neck. Be broken, you peoples, and be shattered. Give ear, all you far countries. Strap on your armor and be shattered. Strap on your armor and be shattered. Take counsel together, but it will come to nothing. Speak a word, but it will not stand, for God is with us. For the Lord spoke thus to me with his strong hand upon me and warned me not to walk in the way of this people, saying, do not call conspiracy all that this people calls conspiracy. Do not fear what they fear. Do not be in dread. But the Lord of hosts, him you shall honor as holy. Let him be your fear. Let him be your dread. And he will become a sanctuary and a stone of offense and a rock of stumbling to both houses of Israel, a trap and a snare to the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and many shall stumble on it. They shall fall and be broken. They shall be snared and taken. Bind up the testimony, seal the teaching among my disciples. I will wait for the Lord, who is hiding his face from the house of Jacob, and I will hope in him. Behold, I and the children whom the Lord has given me are signs and portents in Israel from the Lord of hosts, who dwells on Mount Zion. And when they say to you, inquire of the mediums and the necromancers who chirp and mutter, should not people inquire of their God? Should they inquire of the dead on behalf of the living? To the teaching and to the testimony, if they do not speak according to this word, it is because they have no dawn. They will pass through the land, greatly distressed and hungry, and when they are hungry, they will be enraged and will speak contemptuously against their king and their God, and turn their faces upward. And they will look to the earth, but behold, distress and darkness, the gloom of anguish, and they will be thrust into thick darkness. That's chapter 8. Okay, but it's leading into something. But just wanted to recap with this lovely slide that Aled made last week that I hope you can see. Because that chapter there is what's going on. We just need to recap. So Judah in the south, the south kingdom with Jerusalem in it. King Ahaz, he's there, and it looks smaller, but there are quite a lot of people, but two of the tribes formed that, but it was named after the first one, Judah, the biggest one. And then to the north, there's a separate kingdom, the kingdom of Israel, the other 10 tribes, often known as Ephraim in Isaiah, because that was the largest of the tribes. And there is a king who is just known as the son of Remaliah. It doesn't even get his own name. Apparently it is Pekah. Thank you for putting that on there, but doesn't appear in he's just mentioned as being the son of someone. There's obviously an element of disdain about the king of Israel at this point. And then further to the north, you see Syria. And the king there is Rezin. And they've both got a mention there in chapter 8 that actually Israel was guilty of looking to them. And then further north, you can see Assyria. And Assyria was a huge kingdom and was threatening Syria and Israel. So the two kings of Syria and Israel had got together, made an alliance, decided they would hold off Assyria, and they realized they could do with a bit more help there, so they approached Judah, and Ahaz refused, at which point in chapter 7, Isaiah goes to see the king and tells him a number of things, which we'll come back to. But all that is going on, and that's kind of some of the consequences of what happened in chapter 7 are now being borne out in what is going to happen in chapter 8. And I'll go into it in detail, but that's why it's so complicated. But it goes on from there into chapter 9. So let me just recap here. At the end it says, and they will look to the earth, but behold, distress and darkness, the gloom of anguish, and they'll be thrust into thick darkness. So the people are in thick darkness, okay? The end of chapter 8. Chapter 9. But there will be no gloom for her who was in anguish. In the former time he brought into contempt the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in the latter time he has made glorious the way of the sea, the land beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the nations. And this bit you may recognize, because I think we read it just about every Christmas. It says, the people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in a land of deep darkness, on them has light shone. You have multiplied the nations, you have increased its joy. They rejoice before you as with joy at the harvest, as they are glad when they divide the spoil. For the yoke of his burden and the staff for his shoulder, the rod of his oppressor, you have broken, as on the day of Midian. For every boot of the trampling warrior in battle tumult, and every garment rolled in blood will be burned as fuel for the fire. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end, on the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and to uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time forth and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will accomplish this, or will do this, as I say. So I think we've probably all heard that last little bit. I think Sarah preached on it at Easter, on that bit of Isaiah chapter 9. Just to recap where we got to in chapter 7. So this was Alid last week saying Ahaz was challenged about who he trusted. And what did I put in the next slide? Oh, yes, okay. So in chapter 7, it says, again the Lord spoke to Ahaz, ask a sign of the Lord God, let it be as deep as Sheol or as high as heaven, which is basically saying, I'll move heaven and earth for you, God is saying to Ahaz. And Ahaz says, I will not ask. I will not put the Lord to the test. And he's actually quoting Deuteronomy, where Israel gets told off for putting the Lord to the test. But the context of that is really interesting. They're in the desert. It's in Exodus 17, I think. It's in the desert. And God has demonstrated his goodness to them repeatedly up to that point, provided everything they need, and they get to a place and they start arguing about the fact that there's no water. And Moses strikes the rock with his stick and water gushes out. And Moses says to the people, why do you test God? And he's not saying test them as in give him something to do. He's actually saying, why are you testing his patience? Why are you testing everything about him? He's provided for you all this time. Why don't you still trust him? And that kind of test is a lack of trust. And the very verse that Ahaz has quoted is the one that means the opposite of what he thinks in that case. He's actually been challenged. Are you going to trust God now, like we did in the past? And he's actually referred back to the very thing he should be remembering, that God has said, I will be with you. But the reason I want to kind of refer to that now is it's going to come in again. So here we go. So what is Isaiah 8 about? I'm sorry this is going to take a little bit of sorting through, but we can't sort of cut bits out because they're difficult. So here we go. So what are the key aspects? So this first one, this name I couldn't say, Meher Shalal Hashbaz. The name means hasten to the spoil, I think. And actually it's referring to the fact that Syria and Israel, those two kingdoms to the north, are going to quickly be wiped out by Assyria. And just to make sure everyone understood that, Isaiah is instructed to name one of his children this. So that's great, isn't it? I'm very happy I'm called David. That seems a very fairly simple name. But if that was my name, I'm not sure. I hasten to the spoil. Names are really important in Isaiah. And this is another of 4 children who get names, which mean significant things. So here's the second. So this son. So Isaiah is given the name first, and then when his son is born, he said, give him that name, the name you wrote down before. Because people need to know that this is my hand, God is saying. Okay, so that's that little bit. The next bit is about Judah's misplaced trust. And so it says, Judah rejected the gently flowing waters of Shiloh, it says. And that there is a stream in Jerusalem, a water source. It's called Shiloh. It gets later known as the Pool of Siloam, which we might refer to in a moment. And it means God provides. And in fact, it was the thing they were supposed to remember about God having provided water in the desert. There's this source of water in Jerusalem. And so Isaiah, knowing that is meant to be what they're supposed to be doing, remembering that God provides, he contrasts that now in this little section with the waters of the Euphrates. That is Assyria. So it's not real waters. It's actually an Assyrian army. But he's just making the contrast. So you've rejected the provision of God, the gentle flowing waters of Shiloh, and in are going to come the waters of Assyria. Okay. Next little bit, Isaiah warns them that not to worry about conspiracy theories. I think that could probably find some traction with us now, is that the world seems to be full of conspiracy theories, but as it was then. And human nature is always to make stuff up, really, and it gains traction. But Isaiah says, fear God, not man. And he urges the people to honor the Lord, who will be a sanctuary to some, but a stumbling stone to others. And there's a bit in there which we could also have done a whole sermon on about the stumbling stone, and that gets picked up in the New Testament. The stone of God himself, of Jesus. But we won't. The next little bit, Isaiah refers to the children. He mentions, so the remnant, we've had several children now, there are 4. So the remnant will return is the first one. Can't remember what that is in Hebrew, but we'll cover that in earlier on. The child that's God is with us, he's from chapter 7 that Ali touched last week, Emmanuel. And then this third child, hasten to the spoils. And then eventually we're going to come to the 4th child in chapter 9, who we know to be Jesus. But Isaiah resolves to wait for the Lord, and he's waiting, and he warns against turning to mediums and occult practices instead of God's word. And then we get into chapter 9, and there's promise of light. So suddenly we've gone from despair in chapter 8 into the prophecy of light for Zebulun and Naphtali, which is Galilee, which we know is where Jesus lived. And Galilee was in an unfortunate position on the map because it was the place where any invading army would go to first. It had a lot of greenery. It was easy to access because there was a sea there, and it was fairly level land to get to. So they always got it first. And so that was a place of disaster. People who came from Galilee were looked down on because they lived in this awful place that got invaded repeatedly. But actually, that's the place God chose to live. He said, that's where your Saviour will come from. Okay. So chapter 9 then, unto us a child is born. And I had a think about this and thought, Isaiah gets mentioned quite a lot in the New Testament, but I hadn't realised just how much. It's marvellous what you can do with AI and analysis and concordances and things. But I am told there are 60 direct quotes from Isaiah in the New Testament. So just about every week we should be able to link something in Isaiah to And even in chapter 8, there are at least 5. Those things, I talked about the stone of stumbling, which is in 8:14, gets quoted in Romans and 1 Peter. This thing of waiting for the Lord. And Hebrews also, I think slightly out of context, talks about Jesus and his children, and there's this reference to this verse about the children, but they were the 4 children of Isaiah, or possibly of Isaiah, but 2 of them were his at least. But the one we probably would concentrate on would be the one that gets repeated in Matthew 4 about light in the darkness. And it is when Jesus starts his ministry in Galilee. So, let's just repeat that. For unto us a child is born, to us a son is given, the government shall be upon his shoulder. His name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end. On the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it, uphold it, with justice and with righteousness from this time forth and forevermore. I sometimes look at the complexity of what went on to get Jesus to fulfill every prophecy. And so he ended up being born in Bethlehem, living in Galilee, was a descendant of David. That's all made clear in the Gospels. Even though he wasn't from Jerusalem and where the king was. And for all that to happen is really quite tricky. And then there are other things that get referred to in the New Testament where in fact Mary and Joseph took him to Egypt, and there's a quote about out of Egypt I've rescued my son, and they've just said all these little bits are all pointing at Jesus. And the reason that Isaiah is so exciting is that it does have such weight in the New Testament. It gets repeated again and again. God has said all this. This is not something the Christians have made up. This has all been said hundreds of years before Jesus walked the earth. Okay. So we, where did I go next? Here we go. I just wanted to have a little reflection on this. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. So this is, we've had the valley and now another mountain here. We've got the coming light, the Prince of Peace. Mighty God is coming to save his people, the Messiah. And it says the zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. And so I want to have a little look at the word zeal. And apparently, according to a concordance, zeal has similarities to an Arabian word meaning to become intensely red. It's like jealousy, like passion, anger. And zeal is an emotional word. It's used in Proverbs to describe the husband's jealousy for the love of his wife. Envy that leads to action in Ecclesiastes, for the love that burns in the heart of the bride and groom in the Song of Songs. And later on in Isaiah chapter 42, describes God stirring up his zeal like a warrior, readying himself for battle. And in the New Testament, and Jesus goes into the temple and upsets the tables of the money changers and shoos the traders out of the temple. And the Apostle John then quotes in Psalm 69:9 that says that zeal for your house will consume me. Zeal, it's that passion. We don't have a distant God who is just, letting everything happen. It's his passion that makes all this happen. And when you look at the story of what happened to Israel here, and the fact that the king and the people rejected God's provision, he didn't leave them, but the consequences were because of his zeal, his passion. Otherwise, he could have said, well, that's it, I've had enough. You've messed up too many times. But he's passionate for his people. He's wanting a people. And he knows that they are going to repeatedly fail and reject him. But despite all that, he is the one who is going to intervene. When we come to this passage here, these names, as I say, are significant. And so the name Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. We'll have a look at those in a minute. But this is God himself. There can't be any question that this is what he's talking about, because no child should have those names otherwise. So, had a strange thing happened to me this week. In the prayer meeting on Thursday morning, we read out, we usually have a passage that we kind of kicks us off, and we looked at John chapter 9. So, the healing of the man born blind, possibly one of my favourite stories in the Old Testament of Jesus just doing something outrageous, really. And so, in this story, Jesus is with the disciples, and they, I think, must point out this man who is there and he's blind, and they say, was it his sin or his parents' sin that caused him to be born blind? And I just love that. And I'm thinking, did they really think that it might be his sin that caused him to be born blind? And what do we think about sin? Or even his parents' sin, and there would be a consequence. But Jesus' answer is just phenomenal. He says, he was like this so that God would be glorified, so that I would come and do this. And then he goes up to him and he spits on the ground and he makes some mud and puts it on the guy's eyes. The guy hasn't said a word at this point in the story. He hasn't said, will you heal me? He hasn't put his hand up. The disciples are just pointing at him, really, because he's always there, and he begs. And tells him to go off to the pool of Siloam, which is the one that is the same pool. Okay, it's the same. Well, this is the water in Jerusalem, the one that gets mentioned that the people have rejected. They've taken away this water. And I was thinking about that. And then he comes back, and the Pharisees are furious not because it's miraculous that a man being born blind has been healed, but because Jesus had done it on the Sabbath. And you think, oh my goodness, God is amongst them. And their reaction is, oh, shouldn't have done that. This man has been born blind, and suddenly the man who's lived in darkness has seen a great light. It's Jesus in this, and I'm sure John is not accidental in the stories he picks in the gospel. But this one is this story. This is what it's like when Jesus comes to earth. People who are blind are now going to see. Jesus himself quotes from Isaiah 61 when he starts his ministry. And the parallels are just marvelous. So there's this story here, and Jesus sends him to the pool, which reminds people in Jerusalem that God provides. And the very pool that has been rejected, according to Isaiah in chapter 8. And Jesus has kind of picked all this up. And I don't know whether he had all of Isaiah in mind, but for me, it just blew me away. And I thought, Jesus, this is all kind of joined together for me. And it is for us. So, let's just recap that. So he was told to wash in the pool of Siloam, Isaiah 8:6, because the people has refused the waters of Shiloh. It's the same waters that flow gently. And that contrast between just doing whatever Jesus has told him to do, or in fact doing the opposite. Ahaz gets in trouble because he says, no, I can sort this out. And what he actually does is he says, to protect me from these two kingdoms here to the north, I'm going to approach the Assyrian king. I'm going to send him treasure from the temple. I'm going to make an appeal to him to ally with him, because he will then come and wipe out the other two, and I'll be safe. And I found a wonderful little description of that, which says that sequence has often been made to look like there's a mouse, and it's in danger because two rats are attacking it, these two kingdoms to the north. And the mouse appeals to the cat and says, come and save me from these rats. And it's not surprising, really, that the cat wipes out the rats in no time and then has the mouse for dessert. Of all the stupid things to do, could he not see that was going to happen? And God said, you don't need to do that. Ask me for a sign. Any sign you like, I will save you. God is with us. It was the name of, and it wasn't just something Isaiah was saying. There's a child involved in this as well. It's just a child born to a young girl, born to a virgin, called Emmanuel. There was some significance to that then. We take it as applying to Jesus now, but it meant something then as well. And it's one of a number of children. So the king isn't just faced with Isaiah saying something. There are children who are named these things. And he's still saying, I'm not sure about that. I'm not going to test God. I'm going to make a deal with the Assyrians. And the consequences are really serious. The question is for that, is there a parallel for us? Are we busy making deals to avoid having to rely on God? As I suspect I am. So I wanted us to reflect really on those names of Jesus. Wonderful Counselor. This is really speaking of wisdom from God that makes no sense, but is true. So for just to Ahaz, he worked out what he thought he should do, and Isaiah coming along saying, no, God will do it. God says he'll be with you. And he just said, no, I can't. I need to work this out myself. And I find myself, I do that too. I want to work out what the right thing to do is rather than trust God. And sometimes it can get quite odd, really, that I would do that. But there's something in us, isn't there, that just wants to say, well, if I've got this, this, and this, then I can calm down and be okay. And God's saying, you're never going to be okay. It's actually, likelihood is, in order to get you to the point where you trust me, I'm going to have to let it be worse. And he's not doing it because he's just ignoring us. He's doing it because he is passionate, because he is, forgotten the word. Zeal. I'm zealous. Sorry, that's the word, zealous. Because he is zealous. That's why he's doing it. He loves us so much that he's not going to let us get away with that. He says it'll do us no good. His wisdom is what we need. His counsel is what we need. And God's counsel is that weakness overcomes power. And so it's a child who is coming. This isn't an army. He doesn't say, I'm going to deal with the Assyrians and the other two kingdoms with a huge army. He sends a child. It makes no sense. And yet we can see now, looking at it, that Jesus' kingdom is being established in ways which make no sense. God's answer to the sin and the death that are destroying his people is not to, and are being bullied by other nations. His answer is not to be a bigger bully. The answer is Jesus. Okay. Next, Mighty God. The child will be named Mighty God. So this isn't God sending another prophet. He's not sending angels. He himself is coming. He will be that child. And the Messiah will be God. And it was one of the things that kind of got missed by the Pharisees and Sadducees in Jesus' time. They were presented with this man who was clearly claiming to be God. And they accused him of blasphemy, and ultimately he was crucified. But if they'd kind of thought about Isaiah, they may have come to a different conclusion and said the child will be God. Okay. Everlasting Father. The everlasting Father, the everlasting, Sheila, in the little bit you read out, talked about God revealing himself to Moses, the great I am, the one who always was, always will be. He's, and he is everlasting, but he's also Father. He's not just a remote God. He wants to relate to us like a father does to children. And that's the offer that's made to us through him. The Messiah is not coming to dominate the world. He's coming to bring the heart of the Father to his people. And finally, the Prince of Peace. Maybe a bit of license here, but I would say he's talking here about the peace between man and God, primarily, because that's what was missing, what is needed, but also peace between man and man. And when we talk about this passage, usually we talk about peace on earth. And that's peace between men as well as with God. And I look at the mess the world is in, as I'm sure you do. And I know that the only peace will come as the world turns to Jesus. There's no other solution. And we don't have to look very far to see what happens if we reject him. Okay. So, it's a favourite thing, isn't it? A Sunday school question. Jesus is always the answer when you have Sunday school questions. And the poor child who's looking at a picture that's drawn on the board of a sheep and says, looks like a sheep. I know the answer is Jesus, but it looks like a sheep. I wanted to just conclude really and bring us back to that man born blind. Because I'd say we're all the same. We're all born blind. We're all born unable to comprehend what God looks like. And we have no chance of understanding the truth, and we're created to love our Creator. That is the truth. We were created to love our Creator, but we were blind to that. And just the same as that man didn't even ask Jesus to do something, Jesus just went up and did it. He's done that with me. I'd like to think that I had some involvement in actually responding to Jesus, but I'm not sure I did really. The circumstances were such that he revealed himself to me, and he's revealed himself to you. And if you don't know him yet, he will reveal himself. That's what he has to do because we are blind. And he may give us something odd to do. And I think I could probably live with somebody spitting in the ground and putting the mud on my eyes. He said, go and wash and you will see. It was fairly simple. It wasn't arduous. There was no financial transaction. There were no clever rituals. Just had to go and wash. And know that it is God who's provided, sent to the very place that reminds us that God provides. So the question for us, like it was last week, is where are we going to put our trust? Are we going to trust in what Jesus has provided for us? And the solution to the fact that our sin and failure has separated us from him? Or are we going to reject him like Ahaz and try and sort everything ourselves? And you might read that and say, well, at some point in my life, everybody has to give their life to Jesus. But that decision continues. We continually get challenged. God said, are you going to trust me? Are you going to work it out for yourself? That is the choice we're continually making. And his zealous nature, his passion for us means he's always going to come out and say, I'm going to bring you to this point. There's no other way. I know what is best for you. So I thought, whatever question you're wrestling with, that is the answer. Jesus is the answer to wherever we are in life at the moment. I want us to sing to kind of respond. So I need the band, which is apparently me as well. But I think we'll just take a moment, Paul, if you, just to think about the things that we're currently worrying about, wrestling with, and saying, God, I want you to be the answer to those. I want to trust you where it's difficult to trust you, where I see the armies coming over the border, and I want to do something else. It was good at the beginning when Paul got us just to reflect on from that psalm on God's goodness, his faithfulness to us, the things he has done, and to tell one another about the things God has done. Because they're the things that we then carry forward to the next. They're the things that Ahaz was supposed to be reflecting on. He was supposed to think, God has said he's with us, and he's saying it again. Now Isaiah's come up and said, God is with you. And just ask whatever you want, and he'll give it to you. And even with all that going on, Ahaz said, no, I can sort this. And that is our default position. So let's take a little time just to reflect, and then we will worship.